minute or two. We just went live. All right. Welcome everyone joining us on Facebook and joining us on Zoom. We are really excited to welcome our presenters, Brittany, Tara, Pearl, and Elisa of the Occupational Therapy program at Touro College. I'm going to briefly go over some logistics and introduce NAMI-NYC, and then I'm going to turn it over to them. So please, again, feel free to say hello and put any questions that you have in the chat. We will be saving those questions for the end, but I promise we'll be keeping track of them. Again, we are going to keep everybody muted. So definitely please, but again, please feel free to say hello in the chat. If you're on a laptop, your chat button is going to be at the bottom of your screen next to a little speech bubble. If you're on a phone, you can find it by tapping the three dots at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you are joining us on Facebook, you can also put comments and questions as a comment on the live stream, and those will be passed on to us. So we welcome your participation through the Facebook live stream as well. If for whatever reason you're in the Zoom chat and in the Zoom call and you can't access the chat and you have a follow-up question, you are also welcome to email me, Clara, at ckiley@naminyc.org. That's CKIELY at naminyc.org. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well and share it again at the end of the presentation. NAMI-NYC, the co-host of tonight's event, is the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York City. We are a grassroots mental health organization that is based in New York City, but is currently running remotely. And our mission is to provide support, education, and advocacy for all individuals and families impacted by mental illness. So right now, that means we have classes and support groups being run through Zoom, both for people living with mental illness and their family members and loved ones. All of our groups are peer-led, which means that our groups for example, those who are struggling with bipolar disorder or hearing voices or depression are facilitated by people who have struggled with bipolar disorder or hearing voices or depression. Our family and friends groups are similarly facilitated by trained volunteers who have personal experience as family or friends. So our goal is to create a community where people can talk about their experiences without shame with people who have been there. So that's what we do. You can find out more about any of our services by contacting the helpline Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at 212-684-3264. And again, I'm going to put that phone number in the chat as well. You can also email us at helpline@naminyc.org or visit our website at naminyc.org. And particularly, I recommend taking a look at our calendar at naminyc.org/calendar. I'm going to put all of those in the chat as well. So events like these are just another way that we're trying to reach out to our community and provide support around specific topics that we know are of interest to all of our community members. With that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenters this evening, Brittany, Elisa, Pearl, and Tara. And again, if you have any questions, I'll be in the chat. I'll be here. And thank you all again so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Clara. Hello, everybody. My name is Eliza Domsky, and I'm an occupational therapy student at Touro College School of Health Science. Today, myself, along with my peers, are going to be presenting mental health and post-COVID syndrome intersecting issues. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Eliza and my peers, and we're each going to be presenting different parts, so you'll be hearing from all of us throughout the night.
Hi, I'm Tara. Nice to meet you.
I'm Brittany.
Hi, I'm Pearl.
So those are my group mates. We really wanted this to be interactive, so please feel free to write any comments in the chat box like Clara was saying, and use reactions, the thumbs up, any reactions that are on bottom. I wanted to start with a small exercise with these emojis. if everyone can take a moment and think about how you're feeling right now, and think about how you're feeling and which emoji you relate to. Which emoji do you feel like is representing your feelings right now? If you feel comfortable, you can put the plus or minus representative of the emoji in the chat box and write why you think you're feeling this way. If you could also write it down somewhere for yourself, because we're going to be coming back to this number later at the end of the presentation. Okay, great. We're getting a lot of responses. 0, -2, +2, 0. Okay, we got a -1 because of everything that's happening at the Capitol. Oh, we got a +3. Great. A lot of neutrals. Also, great. +1, things are just okay. 0, tired of the virus. I feel like we could all agree with that. 0, have dental surgery tomorrow. I hope it goes well. -2, kind of blah. 10, oh my gosh, so positive. -1 with the pandemic and the politics. -2, a 3, that's great. -3, 2, doing well. A 10 and 11, that's great. Okay, great. Thank you everyone so much for your responses. Oh, so exciting. Expecting a baby girl soon. Congratulations. Thank you everyone so much for your responses and engaging with us. For anyone that didn't want to write their answers in the chat box, you could just think about this number and keep it in the back of your minds because we're going to come back to this later. I wanted to give everyone this opportunity to reflect on how you're feeling right now before we start to begin this presentation and begin speaking about COVID. I wanted to review COVID in general so we can look more in depth as to what has happened with this pandemic. On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a pandemic. COVID-19 is an airborne respiratory infectious disease, and it spreads primarily through droplets of saliva and discharge from the nose. According to the CDC, in the United States, there's over 19 million cases of COVID-19 and over 330,000 deaths from COVID. But these numbers are constantly being updated and could be changing as we speak right now. The main symptoms of COVID in general are fever and chills, cough, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, fatigue, body aches, headache, loss of taste and smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, and GI issues. These are some of the main symptoms of COVID-19 just in general. Next, I wanted to show you an image of doctors and nurses applauding a man as he's leaving the hospital. If we can imagine this together, there's a man, he had COVID and had to be hospitalized because of it. He's been at the hospital for some time, and now he finally gets to go home. The whole team of healthcare workers are cheering him on, and it's a really, really exciting moment and a moment of happiness. It's true that for some people who have been hospitalized from COVID, their journey ends here in the lobby of the hospital. It's a really exciting day for them, and things just get better. But for some patients who have been hospitalized for COVID, their journey doesn't end here. What isn't shown in this image is this man trying to get into his car, trying to get into his home, and having to change many of the things in his life. It's possible that patients who have had COVID can continue to have lingering symptoms for many weeks after being discharged from the hospital or after having contracted the disease. These patients who continue to have lingering symptoms of COVID, whose story doesn't end at the lobby of the hospital or after the typical 2-week period, are who we want to speak to you about tonight. Some people may experience what's called Postcovid Syndrome, which is the term that you saw in the title. There are a lot of terms for this syndrome, and it's also referred to as long COVID. You might see both of these terms in news articles or over the internet. Both long COVID and post-COVID syndrome, they mean the same thing. The people who experience this illness of post-COVID syndrome, also known as long COVID, are called long haulers. Long haulers also might be a new term for some people. So what does this even mean? Long haulers is a general term, and it can be applied to many diseases, and it's not an exclusive term to COVID. Long haulers are people who experience symptoms of a specific disease past the expected recovery time. So now if we bring that into COVID, what is a long hauler in regards to COVID? So in a typical mild case of COVID, recovery will take around 2 weeks. But a long hauler in regard to COVID is someone who continues to experience symptoms past the typical 2-week period. Long haulers could be people who have mild cases who don't require hospitalization within these first 2 weeks, but they'll have lingering symptoms for months, or their symptoms will worsen over time. Whereas other long haulers can start in the hospital and then they get better, but then their symptoms start to flare up again, and then the symptoms start to get worse. So long haulers in regards to COVID-19 is a general term, and it includes many types of cases, but overall, long haulers are people who have lingering symptoms of COVID-19 for many weeks to many months. To put this in perspective and give you a small understanding of what it's like for long haulers, I want everyone to think back to a time that you were sick and you continued to feel sick past the expected time that you thought you'd be getting better. So this could be a flu, it could be someone having a depressive episode that continued on for an extended period of time. Just a time when you felt ill and not yourself for a really long time, and especially a time for a longer time than you thought you'd be experiencing this. That's kind of what it's like for long haulers. People are told in the general public, oh, you have COVID, it'll go away in 2 weeks. But these long haulers, their symptoms persist and continue, and they wonder if they'll ever be back to how they were before they got COVID. A study that was conducted in the United States and UK, which is called the COVID Symptoms Study, showed that 1 in 20 people that have COVID-19 will experience lingering symptoms for more than 8 weeks, just 2 months. It's a long time. They also found that the more symptoms a person has during their first week of COVID, the more likely they are to develop long COVID. I know that was a lot of information to take in. It was a lot of kind of like basic information if people don't know what those terms are. But it was just some background information on COVID, on what long COVID is and who long haulers are. Now Tara is going to go through the common lingering symptoms that long haulers might experience.
Thank you, Eliza. Hi, everyone. Okay, so Eliza spoke a lot about long COVID and feeling these symptoms past the date that we expect someone to get better. So I'm going to go through a few of the symptoms that are common to continue on, and Brittany's going to continue. I'm going to do a few, and she's also going to do a few. So the first one I'm going to talk about is something called fatigue. And fatigue just means feeling so tired, so bogged down, almost as if you have the flu or you missed a lot of sleep and you just don't have the energy to get on with your day like you used to. The second symptom I'm going to speak about is called dyspnea. Dyspnea is spelled D-Y-S-P-N-E-A, if you see it anywhere in any articles. Dyspnea is like a very tight feeling in your chest, almost as if you can't breathe and you can't continue, like I said, do the normal things that you're used you used to be able to do because of this tightness and not getting enough air. So for example, let's say it would take me 2 hours to do my laundry. If I had dyspnea, it might take me a much longer time because I wouldn't have the stamina, or I would feel like I was missing like air in order to get on with it. The third persistent symptom I'm going to speak about today is something called brain fog. It is as it sounds. It feels like your brain is in a fog. You're dizzy, can't make decisions, your head hurts. This is actually believed to be caused by inflammation in the brain, by the blood vessels in the brain. And those three are very, very common, maybe the most common persistent symptoms. And now Brittany's going to continue with the symptoms.
Hi, everyone. So the next persistent symptom that I'm going to talk about is called post-intensive care syndrome. And this one's a little different than the previously mentioned symptoms because it's not specific to COVID-19. It's health problems experienced after critical illness or being treated in the intensive care unit. So anyone who ends up in the ICU for whatever reason can possibly develop post-intensive care syndrome depending on what their experience was like. And we decided to include it as a persistent symptom of COVID-19 because during our research, we found that the medical community really believes that people that have severe symptoms of COVID and need to be hospitalized are at risk of developing this syndrome. So like I said, it's new or worsening physical, mental, or cognitive impairment experienced after critical illness or being treated in the intensive care unit. So some of the physical impairments include muscular weakness, fatigue, dyspnea, respiratory failure, and decreased exercise tolerance. Cognitive impairments include memory loss, trouble with attention, focusing, understanding, and critical thinking. And mental impairments include anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and depression. It occurs in up to 80% of patients that are discharged from the ICU, and the effects can last for several years. And it's not caused only by whatever illness the person had when they went to the hospital. It's also caused by the person's experience. So if someone's in the ICU and they experience acute respiratory distress syndrome, sepsis, delirium, long-term mechanical ventilation, and heavy sedation, they're more likely to develop post-intensive care syndrome. And if you think back to the early days of the pandemic, there was such a call and a need for ventilators, and they were so heavily used. But as the medical community learns to treat COVID more efficiently, they realize that heavy sedation in order to leave people on ventilators for extended periods of time there's such strong consequences on the body that they're trying to use it less and less. And patients with COVID-19 in the ICU are specifically at risk for the syndrome because they also have to deal with social isolation. Right, if someone's in the ICU with COVID, they're not allowed visitors, and their interaction with staff is kept to a minimum because they're trying to prevent the spread of this disease throughout the hospital. So they're in their rooms, they're by themselves, they're not doing much, their body's not being stimulated, their mind's not being stimulated, and this puts them at a greater risk of developing post-intensive care syndrome. Next, I'm going to talk about long haulers and mental health. So due to persistent symptoms like constant fatigue, pain in the chest with physical activity, brain fog, long haulers, they're not able to function throughout their day at the same level that they had before they got sick. They also a lot of times practice social distancing to a greater extent because they're worried about getting sick a second time, or they're worried about possibly getting other people sick. And they're also frustrated at still being ill. When most people are sick, a lot of times like we go to the doctors, we want to know what's wrong and we want to know what we can do to get better. But unfortunately, that hasn't been long haulers' experience because the doctors don't have the answers yet. COVID's still too new. So they're not as physically capable as they previously were. They're feeling very isolated. They're not feeling helped by their doctors. They don't know what's wrong. They're not able to get better. All of these things affect their mental health. So sometimes long haulers experience symptoms of depression, anxiety, sleep disturbances, obsessive compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm now going to talk about the intersection or overlap between mental health issues and long COVID symptoms. I'm going to start by showing a really simple diagram. Sorry. Okay. And with this, we just want to show that many long COVID symptoms are also symptoms experienced in mental health conditions. And we're not saying that they're the same thing, because they're not. They're two separate experiences. But we want to show that many symptoms are experienced in both diagnoses. And it's because of this overlap that there was such a pushback by the medical community about the existence of long COVID, because many of the long COVID symptoms are well-known mental health symptoms. They're not typical symptoms that last from a viral infection. So when long haulers go to the doctors and they describe how they're feeling and what they're experiencing, a lot of times the doctors tell them, well, now you're experiencing some anxiety or you're experiencing some depression. And they're like, yes, I may be more anxious than I was before I got sick, but anxiety is not the reason I feel like there's glass in my chest when I walk up half a flight of stairs, or it's not the reason that I have to sit down after only walking 3 blocks because I can't breathe. So in this next part, we want to show specifically which long COVID symptoms are also experienced in specific mental health diagnoses. So the gray bubbles are long COVID symptoms, and the colorful bubbles are different mental health conditions. And we're going to go through each mental health diagnosis one by one and show which long COVID symptoms are also symptoms experienced in that diagnosis. I'm not going to read them out loud. I'm going to give you time to read through them on your own. But like Clara said before, this is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the NAMI-NYC Facebook page once the presentation's over. So if anyone wants to go back and look it over, you'll be able to do so. So now I'm going to go through them. So again, the intention of this was to show why there's confusion regarding long COVID and mental health, and why when long haulers seek out treatment from doctors, doctors often tell them that what they're now experiencing is mental illness. It's because there's such an overlap amongst the symptoms. And I'm now just going to share a quote. This was from a long hauler that we interviewed, and this was something that she wanted to share. She says, "We just want to be heard. We want to be understood. We want people to believe us, and we want to believe ourselves that hopefully one day we will get to feel normal again." And now Tara is going to talk to you guys about occupational therapy and the role it can play in dealing with persistent symptoms.
Okay, hi everyone again. So we are students of occupational therapy, and a lot of you are probably wondering, what is occupational therapy? There are a lot of different types of therapies. First of all, occupational therapy is OT for short, if you ever see it anywhere. And occupational therapy is a type of therapy that focuses on your occupations. So just to define that, occupations do mean jobs. We definitely get that when we are asked what we're going for. But in this case, occupations actually means things that occupy your time. So think just your daily, day-to-day activities. And that's what an occupational therapist is concerned with. Is somebody having an issue carrying out their day-to-day activities, the normal things that they do every single day. So say getting in and out of a car, making lunch, taking a shower, doing all your normal day-to-day activities. And if somebody, let's say, is in rehab, let's give an example. Someone's in rehab, they had surgery on their arm, and they are having a hard time using their arm. And every day before they go to work, they make a sandwich. That's a daily activity that they do. So an occupational therapist would help them make a sandwich because it's hard for them now that their arm is not the way it used to be. And occupational therapists use compensatory strategies, they use adaptive equipment, and they try to focus on helping people create new behaviors. So teaching them to create new behaviors to, again, help them with their day-to-day activity. Now, I know that this time has been really, really stressful with the pandemic, and we've all been home. And I'm sure that there are a bunch of new behaviors that all of you have come up with that has helped you cope with this pandemic. And I'd really love if you could put them in the chat just to share if you're comfortable. It's almost like you did an OT for yourself, where you had these new behaviors, and I'd love to hear them if you'd like to put them in the chat. So I'll just give you an example. I started cooking, and I never used to do that. Walking to the grocery, yes, as opposed to train. That's really great. Yoga, awesome. Trail running, thank you, thank you. Going for long walks, hiking. I love hiking. Yes, nature. I love walking, but not in the winter. I hear you. Playing Wii, tennis daily, Zoom meetings, gardening. Yeah, that is definitely therapeutic. Reading more, meditating, yoga, trying to keep your normal routine. That is very, very important. Crocheting, I like that. Playing my guitar. So these are all wonderful, great new behaviors. And like I said, we all had to cope, and this is wonderful. Thank you so much for your input and your answers. And now I just want everybody to go back to that picture that Elisa showed in the beginning of the presentation. That man, he's leaving the hospital. If you can just reimagine it, and he feels great, and all the nurses feel great. And for many people, their journey ends there. And for him, we hope it does. We really hope he goes back to normal, and that's that. That's the end of that story. But for some people, like Elisa and Brittany were saying, that's not the end of the journey. That's only half the journey. And let's just think about where he has to go next. He has to get in his car. Now, let's just say that before he came to the hospital, he had no trouble getting in and out of his car. But let's just say he has persistent symptoms, and it's very hard for him to transfer himself from the wheelchair to the car. He's either having fatigue and he just doesn't have the energy, or dyspnea and he feels like he can't breathe. So that's where an occupational therapist would, let's say, jump in for him. Occupational therapist is concerned with his daily activity of getting in and out of the car, and they're going to help him with transfers. That's a huge thing that occupational therapists deal with. They do transfers. Maybe they'll give him some sort of equipment. And in general, that's where OTs really fit in with the whole long hauler. idea is because we are going to look at the long haulers and try and again jump in where they're having trouble with their day-to-day activities. And another thing that occupational therapists are definitely concerned with is what gives meaning and feels good and just makes people happy in their day-to-day life. And they're concerned with the fact that people feel good about what they're doing. So I'm going to share a quote, another quote from a long hauler who we spoke to. And she said like this, she said, "Yes, I do feel blessed that I'm alive, and I battle with guilt over feeling so depressed or feeling so sick still when so many people have succumbed to this virus. But how I feel most days is that this is not living, I am merely existing." And I feel like this is so self-explanatory, and I feel like all of us are feeling like this. She was just feeling like not good and just feeling like she said, merely existing. And that's what an OT also will try to give to people, try to give meaning to their life and introduce activities that make people feel good. And now I'm going to turn it over to Pearl, who's going to speak about resilience.
Thank you, Tara. So here comes the concept of resilience. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard about the concept, but are maybe unclear about what resilience actually means. The idea of resilience is to increase one's ability to overcome challenges. During this trying time, many people have experienced a sense of hopelessness and or helplessness, and maybe just an overall feeling of being overwhelmed. Resilience can mean different things to many different people, but one definition I found helpful is the ability to thrive from stressful experiences while building up protective skills to manage future hardships. To others, resilience can mean having an overall positive outlook on life's challenges or the ability to bounce back easily from hardships. But resilience is personal and can be affected by family, friends, and other life events. So now we come to an exercise that I found helpful in building resilience in individuals. But before we begin, I just want to think back to what Tara just introduced. We all made adjustments and accommodated ourselves during the pandemic. So we truly are all resilient inside, and we have the ability to rise above and overcome stressful situations. So the I am, I can exercise will allow you all to identify different factors that will strengthen your inner resilience. The I have portion refers to your outside factors. So for example, I have access to proper healthcare professionals. I have a safe home where I can isolate. If you have anything to add, please feel free to put into the chat. I would love to hear from you. A few other examples would be I have access to a tablet, I can still stay connected. Let's see some of the responses. I have a good support system. Beautiful. Yes, it's very important to have a good support system. Okay, so moving on to the I am section. I am focuses on your personal strengths. So for example, I am hopeful things will be okay. I am someone who doesn't complain about hardships or struggles. If you have anything to share, just go ahead and put it into the chat. Also, let's go back a little bit. I have a good support system. I have a cat. I have a strong and loving relationship. I have family. Beautiful. I can laugh at myself. I love that one. I am genuinely concerned about my friends. I am hopeful things will get better. Yeah, that's very important. I am staying positive. Amazing. I'm able to express myself fully, which makes me feel better. I am grateful. I am grounded. All wonderful responses. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, and lastly, the I can section refers to your social skills. So for example, I can stay connected to family and friends through FaceTime, Zoom, other social media. I can commiserate with my family and friends. I can find others who can help me in a time of need. Okay, if you have anything to add, just go ahead and put into the chat. I am using self-care. I feel hopeful. I write to friends. I can reach out to people who can support me. I can stay positive. I am part of a Zoom group. I can use technology. I use Zoom to communicate with family and friends. Yeah, it's very important, even when we're isolated and even in quarantine, some of us, it's very important to still stay connected. Technology, amazing. Okay, thank you all for sharing. So what do you think you can take away from this exercise that you can apply to your daily life? Any of you have any thoughts on that? You can just put it into the chat. Create a daily mantra. I love that one. That's really great. In general, self-compassion is so crucial. Whatever we can do is okay. Amazing. Research positive affirmations and say it out loud daily. Yes, I have friends who take account of their daily activities, and at the end of the day, they count 3 things that they're grateful for. Keep using myself and friends to stay safe. Oh, I like this. 10% is what you receive, 90% is how you react. You are in control. Absolutely. Could not agree more. Thank you all for sharing. Those were some amazing responses. We need to work together to keep proper social. Let's see the rest of that. Proper social distancing and to protect ourselves and others. I'm grateful every day. Beautiful, beautiful responses. Okay, moving on. So some of the research that we've looked at were from long haulers, news articles, Facebook groups, Instagram posts, and other resources just like this one. Partaking in research is really simple to do, and it makes a tremendous difference. Just go ahead and download that COVID-19 app you see on your screen and take a moment to put in your information. This is a great way to stay resilient on a community level by providing data to be further researched on the syndrome. And if you ever feel isolated or alone, you can always be a part of the 4 million people who have already contributed to research. The information was so valuable to us, and it was really informative, and we encourage you all to do the same and contribute. Even though some of the long haulers we've already spoken to are still recovering and are not feeling 100% better, they've already proved their resilience by speaking with us and promoting awareness of long COVID. This is another example of how to be resilient during this time, and I truly hope everyone here can find their own ways to stay resilient. Remember, everyone, to stay safe and be positive, and remember, we're all in this together. So now we're going to hear from Elisa, who's going to speak some more about resources for long haulers.
Thank you, Pearl. Thank you for telling us about those opportunities. I wanted to tell you all about support groups that you can connect to after this presentation if you're interested. The first is NAMI-NYC Metro, which, as many of you know, is a great resource. They provide support and education for those affected by mental illness. The second support group is called Survivor Corps. The link for this support group is going to be added into the chat now and will also be sent in a follow-up email from Clara after this event. Survivor Corps supports and educates people about COVID-19, and they promote scientific and medical research. Their website is very thorough, and they provide tons of information and opportunities for people. I highly recommend looking into that. The third are Facebook support groups. There are a lot of Facebook support groups, and they are extremely active. I know that they have been a big help for the long haulers that we've spoken to, and they found the most support in these Facebook groups. The first 2 groups that are listed here are called Long Haul COVID Fighters Round 1 and 2. The second is for those whose onset of illness was after April 2020. These are closed groups, and access is only provided to long haulers. They will, in order to access, they ask to be invited into the group, which if you have Facebook, you send a message to the host of these Facebook support groups and they'll invite you in if you are a long hauler. These are great because they create a safe space where people can relate to each other, knowing that nobody else is watching them or listening to them. They're able to connect to others that are going through the same experience of themselves in a closed way. The third that's listed, long COVID support, is open to the general public, which is a great resource for family, friends, or anyone that's interested in learning about long COVID. People share their stories of what it's like living with long COVID. There's news articles posted, and it's a really great place to learn about long COVID and hear people's experiences. There are many COVID Facebook groups for specific locations, religions, ethnicities. If you put long COVID support in the search engine of Facebook, lots of these small groups will pop up and you can join the one that seems most, or as many as you would like, that seem most interesting and fitting for you. There are also clinics in the New York City area that are just for long COVID patients. There's a link that we're putting in the chat that has a thorough list, and the link will also be sent out by Clara after this event. And it's a very, it's a very thorough list, but I'm going to mention two that are here in the New York City area. Mount Sinai Center for Post-COVID Care is located in Union Square, and they are running clinical trials and have a whole team of healthcare workers for the patients at the clinic. And their phone number is here on the slide, but it's also in that link that is provided. Montefiore's Core Clinic is located in the Bronx, and they treat anyone with a positive COVID or antibody test. And they provide appointments to patients with cognitive, emotional, and physical effects from COVID. Their phone number is also on the slide. The link in the chat gives a longer list of these clinics that are catered towards long haulers who have long COVID. There are locations all over the New York area, including Manhattan, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. Earlier, we did an emoji exercise, and I wanted to ask everyone again, how are you feeling right now, and which emoji do you relate to the most? You can take a moment and think about how you're feeling. But I also want you to then look at the number that you related to the most before. Is there anybody that felt a change and relates to a different emoji now than they related to before? If there was a change, why do you think that this change occurred? Please feel free to write your responses in the chat box. Or if you didn't feel a change, or if your number went down, please, we would love to hear everyone's participation and why they think that their numbers may have changed or not changed. Okay, great. We have 1, -1, +3, awesome. -2, because of the current political climate. I was at +1 earlier today. Yes, there is a lot going on, especially today. And that's okay to feel like that, especially when current events are so hectic. +1, because I'm not as isolated as I thought. I'm so happy to hear that. That was definitely a big reason why we are doing this today. +3, this has been extremely informational and have learned a lot. I'm so happy to hear that. Knowledge is power. Great. +1, no change. Also okay. -3 to 1 must be due to calm, helpful presentation and Capitol Hill getting under control again. Learning about more resources, positive change. In the summer, it was 0. +1, the same number, but still hopeful for better times. It's great. +3, terrific. +1, positive information. Thank you all so much for engaging and putting your answers into the chat box. Thank you for sharing this feedback because it's helpful for yourselves to express and to reflect on how you're feeling. And it's also helpful for others to hear and know that they're not alone if they were feeling those same numbers. I wanted to end tonight with explaining that our intention today was to educate you about who long haulers are and the ways that mental health can be affected by long COVID and how long COVID can affect mental health. We hope the idea of resilience is something that you can take with you and that you can think about how you already have inner personal strengths that you can use when feeling less hopeful or sad from the pandemic or really any time in life. We can also be more hopeful now that the vaccine has started to be administered and that hopefully the world will be a healthier place very soon. Always remember to wash your hands, wear a mask, social distance, try to stay safe and stay healthy. Before I go through everyone that I would like to thank, I wanted to see if anyone has any questions on the presentation that we can answer now. And we'll also look back at the previous questions that have been put in the chat and try to answer them now.
So there have not been any questions that I've seen in as of yet in the chat, but for anybody that, if I missed anything or if anybody has any questions, now is a really great time. Oh, no, there was one question about if there were any clinics that you all were aware of in Connecticut for people that may be outside of New York City.
Mm-hmm. I haven't researched Connecticut specifically, but these things, hopefully you could look into it on the internet and do some searching and try to find. It is also, since it's so new, honestly, things are opening up every day. When we started this research, there were only a few clinics, and since then, it has grown so much. There are so many more clinics than there were before. So it's definitely something to continue to look into and continue to Google and see if things start to open up near you.
So one more question, I think it's a great question in the chat. Are there age trends in terms of long haulers versus quicker recovery?
There's really, like, from what we can find, there's no, doctors can't figure out a rhyme or reason. They can't figure out like who ends up experiencing persistent symptoms more than anyone else. It didn't matter, like age didn't matter so much. How severe your case was while you had acute infection didn't matter so much. There's not.
It's also new. It's also new that the research isn't thorough enough yet to make conclusions about age. So we can't really say, but it is something that researchers are looking into now, and they're trying to figure out anything that they can about why people might become a long hauler.
Cool. All right, I don't see any other questions in the chat. I'm also gonna allow, are long haulers, this is a great question, are long haulers COVID positive for an extended period of time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I could answer. Does someone else want to answer? Whichever. Fine. Okay, fine. I think that they aren't positive. They get a negative test, and they will test negative, but they'll continue to have symptoms, and the symptoms aren't going away. And for example, one of the long haulers that we spoke to, she was getting negative tests, and she was saying how she still felt symptoms from COVID, and the doctors were like, but your tests are coming back negative. And this was also when it was new and people didn't know about long haulers as much. So they didn't really know what was wrong because she was testing negative.
And if I could just jump in here for a second, that's why it's so frustrating, because no one can figure out like what it is. They're not positive for COVID, so we know it's not. But is it not? It's still in the research stage, and there's just not enough research to draw conclusions like that. So like we're all saying, like they're still researching and things are popping up. So they're still in that phase.
Yeah, if I could just jump in for a second, I think that's why a lot of these long haulers are getting so frustrated with healthcare professionals, because they are testing negative. So the healthcare professionals are just saying, oh, it could be anxiety or any stress related diagnoses, and it's symptoms of COVID. So it's very frustrating on their part.
Another question from the chat. What have you heard about speech therapy to deal with some of the cognitive symptoms, or physical therapy for the respiratory challenges in healing, such as shortness of breath or pain when breathing?
There was one doctor who I spoke to who was part of one of these post-COVID clinics, and he said that a lot of the patients ended up in physical therapy. He didn't really know so much about speech therapy. I haven't really seen that. If someone else has seen that, I personally haven't, but I did definitely hear one of the clinics that we posted. I'm not sure which one, but after being treated in that clinic, they will refer people to a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. So that much I have heard.
Can you all talk about, there's one, this isn't a question, but I think it's a point that we can address. Someone mentioned if people find out someone had COVID, they don't want to be around you. Can you talk a little bit about the stigma, or sort of if you encountered people who were experiencing that kind of, people around them were distancing themselves from that person if they knew that the person had COVID or was having these symptoms in a long-term way?
What we found more was almost the opposite. The people that had persistent symptoms were so concerned with getting sick again. And also they didn't know if they could, now that they're testing negative, they could possibly still be a carrier or not. So they were themselves making sure to stay away from a lot of people and interacting with as few as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have a couple more minutes, so I'm actually going to allow people to unmute themselves if they would like. So we're gonna allow for a little bit more interaction for people who may not have been able to put their questions in the chat. So if you you're gonna still be muted, but now you should have the option to unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question.
I have a thought. I just wanted to mention I
Robert,
had mental health issues for over 30 years. So I found a couple organizations to be very helpful. And yes.
Robert, your sound is really
Am I not coming through?
It's hard to hear. If you can put your suggestion into the chat, I can read it out. It's just the sound is making it hard to understand. Sorry. Oh, another question here. While we're waiting to see. It's just the sound. Oh. Okay. While we're waiting for other folks, do you know if having a low heart rate is part of being a long hauler?
Well, some of the research that we've taken a look at shows significant discrepancies with heart rate. So it affects everyone differently, but there have been some cases where it affects the heart rate. It could be too fast of a heart rate or too low.
Clara?
Yes.
Hi, this is Amy. I have to go, but this has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, anybody, we do still have a couple more minutes left. So if anybody does have other questions or would like to, yeah, has questions for the presenters, we are all yours.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Sarah. Hey, I was just wondering if there have been any cases or examples of people who were mostly asymptomatic and then started having like weird symptoms later that might be from COVID, but they didn't even have a bad case.
Mm.
The earlier like articles that were coming out about people with long COVID, that did seem to be the case. They had very mild cases of COVID, and then they started testing, they got negative, they were no longer having acute infection, but the little symptoms that they did have just progressively got worse.
Thanks.
Yeah, Diane, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to, I put a question in the chat box, and I know this isn't something that a lot of people have or experience as a long hauler. I went through several weeks of several months of speech therapy to help deal with the brain fog. And I also went through physical therapy once I learned that the impact of COVID-19 could be COVID pneumonia. And so have you heard or have you heard from other long haulers who had success with those therapies or even been offered those therapies to help overcome some of the impact of COVID-19?
I think most of what we heard is like respiratory therapy and physical therapy, but they were also noting that as it's becoming more well known that this is happening, they're hoping to add other therapists onto the rehab teams. But most of the rehab teams are small and are limited to like respiratory therapists and physical therapists.
I found for the brain fog, that was the cognitive piece was a huge impact. For me is it's, while I'm not back at a pre-COVID-19 functioning, I'm significantly better. And as I guess as a encouragement for folks, is stuff that they can ask their doctors to have them assess for it. Because I think what happens is you think I have fatigue and I kept saying, oh, I have anemia. That's why I'm tired. You don't know what belongs to the COVID-19. So your symptoms graphics were very helpful. And I think knowing that, like not getting used to being told that your feelings are not real is very important, and advocating for yourself is helpful. And I did put in a chat line a resource. I started a support group I needed it for myself. It wasn't there. And so I have some other information that I will be share with others and you all for the future.
Thank you.
Please do, thank you. And I think that's a great suggestion of things that other folks that may be listening can advocate for themselves for, whether it's to add speech therapy or to add different kinds of therapy that they think might be helpful. Oh, thank you, Robert. I'm just going to read off that his suggestion. He says that he's found the information on the NAMI website and the Zoom presentations, as well as the Zoom groups, to be very helpful, especially in connecting. So thank you for that recommendation, Robert. I'm sorry that your sound wasn't working. Yeah, and again, there's a lot of COVID support groups on Facebook. Those were actually. Do you think Brittany, would you be able to go back to the slide about the support groups so that people can see those? Yeah.
The long haulers that we spoke to found the long haul COVID fighters, round 1 or 2, whichever one applies to them, and the long COVID support, those 2 Facebook groups, they found those to be extremely helpful. I know that those were very popular and they have a lot of members.
Yes, and the survivor corpse, I put that in the chat earlier. I think you're going to send that out after the presentation. That's a website where you can find a lot, like many resources,
Absolutely.
information.
One last question, which I think is just a good one informationally. What percentage of people that test positive for COVID end up being long haulers?
So it's a hard question to 100% be able to answer because it's so new and there's still research. But in one research study that was done in October, said that 1 in 20 people are likely to experience lingering symptoms for more than 8 weeks. So that's pretty common, but the lingering symptoms might not necessarily be like they could be minor symptoms, but they are persisting. Like it could be that they feel fatigue in a way that they could continue to function throughout their day, but they still are feeling this fatigue, or they're feeling shortness of breath, or like there's tons of symptoms that they could be feeling. So I can't say for certain what the numbers are because the research is so new and it's still like they're still researching it, but that's what we've seen so far.
So that's 1 in 20 people who get COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So I think that we are wrapping up. Brittany, would you mind going to the next slide with the clinics and actually reading off? I know there's a couple of people who are joining us via phone. I can't see the screen. Would you be able really quickly to read the 2 clinics and the phone numbers for any folks that may be listening on the phone line?
So the Mount Sinai Center for Post-COVID Care. Give them a minute to write that down.
And again, if anybody would like to, if anybody has questions and wasn't able to get them answered, you can reach me, Clara, at CKIELY@NAMI-NYC.org.
The Mount Sinai Center, their phone number is 212-844-6300. And then the other clinic, the Montefiore Clinic, is their phone number is 844-556-6683, and the extension is 36.
All right, and so I think with that, we are coming to the end of the presentation. Or is there any last wisdom or things that you found in your research that you four would like to share with the audience before we close up?
I think for me, the most notable thing working on this was that we started like the end of October, and just between the end of October and the middle of January, so many more resources have opened up for this population of people. I mean, when we started, literally, it was only the Mount Sinai Clinic was the only clinic open for post-COVID care. And now there's like a whole webpage of clinics. So it's definitely starting to be more recognized and more resources are open, and there are people out there who are ready to help.
And also, if I could just add that through the therapies, through the research that we did, we found that people are really getting better through the therapies and they're really working. So there's a lot of hope and a lot of resources. So yeah, it's just something to be hopeful and feel good about.
Yeah, and also even if someone is technically classified as a long hauler, there is still hope of getting better. There are long haulers who have recovered after 10 weeks after 12 weeks, after 2 weeks. So there is a lot of hope in that area.
I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you all so much again for joining us. Again, everyone who registered for this event will be getting an email later this evening with some of these resources and more information. So keep an eye out for that. And we really appreciate all of you spending your evening with us. And thank you again so much, Brittany, Eliza, Pearl, Tara. You've all been wonderful, and we appreciate you sharing your expertise and knowledge with us. And thank you, a big thank you to Suzanne at Touro for facilitating this partnership.